Welcome into another episode of the North Carolina Tar Heels Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Logan Lazarchik, as well as beat writer for the North Carolina Tar Heels on SI. Back today with another episode. As always, I appreciate you guys tuning in each and every week, each and every day to follow along with the news and updates from Chapel Hill. You can find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere and every platform where you get your podcasts. But today we are going to shift to the football program. North Carolina entering a pivotal 2026-27 season after a disappointing 2025-26 season in which the program did not qualify for bowl eligibility for the first time since 2018. And today we will be focusing on the three members of this program facing the most pressure and scrutiny heading into the upcoming season. And the first one's going to be pretty obvious. We're going to start right at the head coach, Bill Belichick. As we said, North Carolina had a really disappointing campaign in 2025. They went 4-8, 13th place in ACC. And Bill Belichick, he was hired 5-year deal, $50 million, $10 million per season. And, North Carolina, they brought in Michael Lombardi as a general manager. They were labeled as the 33rd franchise pertaining to the NFL with 32 teams. They were believed to, bringing in Bill Belichick, he would bring his NFL success to the college game. But quite frankly, he hadn't been successful in New England for the last few years of his tenure there. And, a lot of his success, you can't take it away from him, but a lot of it is kind of looks like Tom Brady, deserves most of the credit because Tom Brady left, won a Super Bowl, and the Patriots really didn't do anything from that point forward. And, Bill Belichick, he was let go from New England. It was labeled as a mutual parting of ways, but we all kind of know that he was let go by owner Robert Kraft. He goes to North Carolina, and, his rigid ways, people doubted, his ability to relate to players in the NFL. It's going to be much tougher to relate to college kids 18, 20, 21 years old. And, that kind of proved to be the case last season. And he did things his way last season. Gio Lopez, a couple weeks ago talked about how, and Gio Lopez, he transferred from North Carolina to Wake Forest this offseason. He talked about how the offense really didn't allow, freedom for the quarterback. The quarterback would be, criticized if he tried to change a play, try to audible, try to go through all those things. It didn't really feel like a fun atmosphere in Chapel Hill. And, for college players, they're getting paid nowadays. It's more of a job, but at the same time, your job is supposed to be something that you enjoy. And Bill Belichick, if you can only be rigid if you're winning games, and you can only have that mindset of you're my way or the highway if you're producing wins. And obviously he didn't do that last year. And, I believe that he is on the hot seat. And I think a lot of people believe that as well. I don't think that's, outlandish take or a hot take or anything. They have to win games in 2026. And, the fact that he was brought in, they fired Mac Brown. They brought in Bill Belichick. In his first year, they don't even, qualify for postseason play, not even just a lower tier bowl. Kind of speaks to how, he's looked in over his skis. He didn't really look like he belonged as a head coach. He was being outcoached by, college level coaches. And, you never think that, in the NFL, and, it's kind of tarnished his legacy a little bit. And, another season, I think, of what they did last season, replicating what they did last season, I do think he will be let go, and the buyout is not that much, or it's like a $1 million buyout or something like that, and I think Bill Belichick needs to win games, and they need to win early. They played TCU again, the season opener. We know how that went last season. They got, blown out in the first week. They're playing TCU in Ireland in 2026 to open their season. That has to at least be a competitive game, but they need to win that game. And I do think North Carolina has had a pretty solid offseason in terms of bringing in transfers. The recruiting has stepped up. And, Bill Belichick, in his defense a little bit, he did come into this role last season, without having the ability to assemble a roster. He brought in a couple players here and there. He brought in some coaches on the staff, but he didn't really get to build the team in his image, and he got to do that this offseason. And now we have to see that in action. And there's gonna be nobody's gonna give him any leeway here. You signed a contract worth $10 million per year. You were brought here to win games, and North Carolina needs to win, early and often, and they need to stack wins as much as possible. And last season finishing 13th in the ACC is just not going to cut it, especially if you have this pedigree of winning multiple Super Bowls with the Patriots, and he's a 6-time Super Bowl winning head coach in the NFL. And so North Carolina was expecting that when they brought him in, and they definitely need that to be the case in 2026. But the second member of the North Carolina Tar Heels program that's facing the most pressure is offensive coordinator Bobby Petrino. Bill Belichick fired Freddie Kitchens this offseason, replacing him with Bobby Petrino, a hire that I was certainly not in love with. I think most people would say that they were underwhelmed. It was uninspiring. It wasn't a hire that, got you off your seat or made you think that there was, that Bill Belichick had changed at any way of his, like I said, my way or the highway. And he hired an offensive coordinator that quite frankly, I don't know if Bobby Petrino really is going to be the answer. I wrote an article the other day about, Bobby Petrino and, overreactions of, people thinking that he could save Bill Belichick's job. I still think that's going to be the case. And he's 64 years old. I would have liked if Bill Belichick brought in a younger offensive mind. And I know it's not going to happen, but there was like Mike McDaniel's on the market. They could have at least pursued that. They didn't. There's plenty of options that they could have pursued other than a aging coach who didn't really have success at his last stop. He was intern for Arkansas. Arkansas was just terrible in 2025. Didn't win many games. He was also a play caller there. He got elevated to the interim head coach. And I think this team has the offensive talent to be better than last season. You have Jordan Shipp. You have multiple recruited wide receivers. I believe the quarterback situation, as much as it doesn't really feel it, the additions they made didn't really feel aspiring as well. We'll talk about one here shortly. It should be better than what Gio Lopez produced last season. But if Bill Belichick's going to be the same way of not letting his quarterbacks really play with any freedom, not letting them, change plays at the line of scrimmage, not really let them diagnose the defense on their own, it's going to be tough for this offense to really reach its potential. And I think Bobby Petrino, as much as, I don't think he's that great of an option at play caller, I also don't know if he's necessarily set up to succeed under Bill Belichick. And, Bill Belichick wants the offense probably to be a run-heavy offense, rely on the defense, and it's going to be like a mundane, boring offense. That's what it was last year. I do expect things to be a tad better this year, depending on who the quarterback is. They have 4 or 5 options in that quarterback room that they will have to choose from during camp. And training camp, is about a month and a half away, 2 months. We'll learn more by then. But this team and this offense, it needs to get quarterback right if it wants to elevate itself. And I think Bobby Petrino there's gonna be a lot of pressure on him to, coach an offense up right away. There's not going to be a lot of, these fans are not going to allow a lot of growing pains at the beginning of the year. We saw that last season. Last season was the learning experience for Bill Belichick and this team. That's in the rear view window now. This needs to be about next season. Next season needs to start, winning games right away. And as I said, they have TCU in Ireland, marquee game, overseas game. College football put that on the schedule for a reason, hoping that, North Carolina turns things around. And Bobby Petrino and this offense are going to have to be a major reason in the turnaround. Because I do believe in this defense. I will give Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi credit for, what they did in the transfer portal, adding a lot of defensive players. I also particularly like what they did in the offensive line. They added multiple offensive line starters that should help, their quarterbacks who are all, mostly newcomers, incoming freshmen. So I like what they did in the trenches, but Bobby Petrino, he has to elevate this offense to a level that it did not come close to in 2025. And I'm just personally not sure if he is the man for the job. I think it's going to be a short-lived experience for him. for max, I see it as 2 years, but he is definitely facing the most pressure, not just from Chapel Hill, but just from the media and the college football world in general. So Bobby Petrino needs to have this offense hitting on all cylinders sooner rather than later. Like I said, we're still a couple months away. Training camp, we still have quarterback competitions going on. We still have positional competitions going on. So a lot has to transpire before we know the full picture, before we can fully diagnose the situation. But I do think Bobby Petrino needs to have this offense at a much higher level than it was in 2025, and he wasn't in there in 2025. So I do think he kind of deserves benefit of the doubt, but personally for me, I just don't have that much confidence in the situation. And third, the third most, the member facing third most pressure for North Carolina this upcoming season, not by no fault of his own, he's inherited this. Travis Burgess, incoming freshman quarterback, 4-star recruit. He, like I said, he's going to be probably competing. Him and Billy Edwards Jr. are probably the two likely candidates for the starting job, in my opinion. They have other options on this quarterback room. I just don't really see those other three options really that compelling, that competitive. And so I think Travis Burgess, not just there's not just going to be pressure from him like if and when he hits the field, but there's going to be pressure right away in training camp to win the job right away out the gates. And so he'll be a player that I think we'll be seeing a lot of training camp reports on his development, how he's going through the offense, how he's running the offense, playing a scout defense and all that. And I do think that if North Carolina wants to reach their potential, Travis Burgess needs to be the starting quarterback at some point this season. And Bill Belichick, if you look at his track record, he's not going to give the young guys, he's not going to give them the opportunity right away. He's probably going to make them earn it, off the bench, learning from the veteran. I think, what we said about Bill Belichick, the fact that he's on the hot seat, he pretty much has to put all the chips in the middle of the table. I do think, putting Travis Burgess in, I know I'm one that I prefer if a quarterback, sits and learns for a little bit, especially, college football incoming freshman, unless you're one of these elite talents. And I do think Burgess can be a very good quarterback. It may just take time for him to learn, but I do think that if the Tar Heels want to get where they want to be next season, Travis Burgess needs to be that starting quarterback. And it may not be week one, but I do think if he's not starting week one, you will see the clear weaknesses of whoever else is starting. And that may be an indictment on Travis Burgess for not winning the job over these other guys. So that's another thing. If one of these other guys beats him out for the job, like a Billy Edwards Jr., and he struggles right away on the field, that could be viewed as an indictment of Travis Burgess not being able to beat him out during camp. But I really think, Travis Burgess, Bobby Petrino, they need to be interlocked in this pressure department. And I do think Travis Burgess, he ends up starting this season at some point. I'm not going to guarantee week one. I'm not going to guarantee early in the season, but I think at some point they're going to have to put him in, especially if they start out the season 0-2, the fans are going to be calling for, because Travis Burgess is by far the most talented quarterback in this room. It's just a matter of, is he ready to take over the reins, as an incoming freshman, as a true freshman starting quarterback. That's really the main question for him. I think he has all the talent in the world, 6'3", 194. He can throw, he can run. It's just about, can he develop, not, his athletic ability or like his, physical talent, but like mentally, can he read the defenses? Can he diagnose things at the line of scrimmage? Those are the type of things that, separate, solid to good quarterbacks to really good quarterbacks. And he needs to be able to do that. So Travis Burgess, I think, is a lot on his plate. Pressure is starting right away. I don't even think it means in terms of regular season. I think it pertains to training camp and how he fares out against these other options in the quarterback competition. But as it is for everybody in this program, I think there's pressure all around for North Carolina. They cannot afford to, have another season where they don't even qualify for bowl eligibility. 6 wins, I know that technically gets you bowl eligibility, but that would even feel as a major disappointment. I think this team needs to aim for, 8 wins, 8, 9 wins. Can you beat 8-5? can you be 9-4? Can you be somewhere in that ballpark and try to be at least one of these competent teams? Because last year, finishing 4-8 and 13th in the ACC in a conference that really wasn't even that good in the first place is just unacceptable, especially when, Bill Belichick comes in with all this pedigree. He wants things done his way. And you kind of saw in New England. I mean, he had player control through the draft, and they never drafted well. And so he has that now in North Carolina, and another bad season. And I do think the tires kind of fall off of this thing. And I do think you'll see a new coach in 2027 if it looks very similar to last season. But yeah, North Carolina, a lot of pressure. I think Bill Belichick's on hot seat. I think a lot of these players, they will feel the pressure early in the season. But that will do it for our episode today. Again, I appreciate you guys listening. You can find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. And as always, we'll be here Monday through Friday, all off season long, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.